I filled up my snowplow truck, and then I drove 40 minutes north to my snowplow accounts. I plowed the first property, then drove across the street to fill it up again. And I decided to measure my gas mileage just for fun. And you know what I got? 3.7 miles to the gallon. Not even 4 miles to the gallon. Now, to be fair, I was hauling 2 tons of salt while pushing heavy snow for 40 minutes. But still, 3.75. And when I told my diesel truck friends about this, they'd say, "Man, Brian, you got to buy a diesel. You'll save so much money in gas." And, I wanted to because I was spending a lot in gas. And I think that year I spent 24,000 in gasoline between trucks and equipment. And, also, I wanted a nicer truck. But, I measured it, the cost of a new diesel truck. But then I'd also have to equip it with the plow and salter, insurance, of course, taxes. And, yeah, I would have saved a few $100s in gas, but this particular truck, I didn't use that much. And the math didn't work out. And I probably would have given in and bought that truck, but I decided to measure things, and measuring it saved me from expensive mistakes, here and plus other times. But here's the thing: for years I didn't measure things in my business, and it really almost destroyed me. I'm Brian Hill. I've owned multiple businesses for the past 20 years. And say construction, lawn care, snow removal, antique business. And in this chapter, I'm going to tell you about the time I had 16 employees, months of work lined up, but I struggled to make payroll every 2 weeks. This is chapter 23, Check Your Fluids, from my book, Business is a Journey, Not a Destination, and This Journey is Your Life. I have a habit of checking my fluids, every few fill-ups, say especially when we're on a vacation. Check the motor oil, transmission fluid, power steering fluid. I don't expect to find a problem, but I measure it to make sure there isn't something brewing or something that could leave us stranded. And, you could also measure your tire pressure, antifreeze levels, or even gas mileage. And, I've mostly owned large V8 motors in all my vehicles, so checking gas mileage has never been a practice of mine. But, if my vehicle's got 14 miles to the gallon, I was thrilled. But there was one time we rented it was a foreign family sedan, and a pretty good sized car, but they boasted how it would get mid-30s on the highway. And, I did check the gas mileage because I was curious, and it religiously got about 35 miles to the gallon. And, it seriously outdid anything I'd ever owned. So, let's go back to that snowplow. It was a Ford, older, 90s, I believe, 460 big block. It was a big F450. And, I filled it up, drove 40 minutes north, plowed one property, went across the street, filled up the gas, and it was 3.75 miles to the gallon. And, my friends who own diesel trucks, they wouldn't stop preaching. They're like, "Man, you got to get a diesel truck for the gas mileage." But, I just couldn't justify spending the money for the new truck, especially for this particular one being a snowplow truck. I didn't want it to get destroyed by salt and really the abuse I put it through. And, after measuring it out, it was just cheaper to use this truck. I averaged probably 6 miles to the gallon. And, but, to buy, say even a used diesel truck, to equip it, insure it, pay taxes, yeah, I would have saved a few $100s in gas, but it just didn't make sense after measuring the cost. And, what if I didn't measure the costs? Just ego stepped in. Oh, I want a new truck. I need a new truck. I would have spent money that I probably shouldn't have. So, on your business journey, you'll want to check your fluids constantly. And just by measuring all things in your business. And, I didn't start doing this till later in my business journey. I just thought, well, you work and the money comes and everything works out. But that's not how it works. And Peter Drucker, he was a management guru. He said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So be sure to measure every aspect of your business. At this time, we had so much work. I had 16 employees. I could have used more. I felt like we were doing very well until, of course, I wanted to buy something or try to do something for the business, but there just wasn't no cash there. I even struggled to make payroll every 2 weeks, and it just didn't make sense. We were so busy. 16 employees, enough work to keep them busy for months, but the money was flying out the door faster than it was coming in. So then, I started measuring stuff. At this time, I had some lawn mowing routes, and I found that it's something that just blew me away. I had 8 lawn mowing routes, and had 1 that broke even, 2 that were kind of profitable, and then the other 5 I was actually losing money on. And when I figured this up, this was on, say, the perfect world. Your trailer doesn't have a blowout. The mowers always start. There's no equipment issues. It didn't rain midday, and the guys had to come back and then go back across town to finish that route the next day. I was assuming perfect storm, I guess you'd say. And so, if anything went sideways, those few routes I was profitable on became a losing situation. And, I tried different stuff, trying to get the routes profitable, and I just couldn't do it. And so I ended up subcontracting the large mowing accounts out to a friend of mine. And then the slower, smaller, high-maintenance accounts, I gave them away to this friend that subcontracted for me. But instantly, the remaining accounts became very profitable. And then these 4 employees that were mowing, I trained them to do property maintenance, bush trimming, mulch, weed control, landscaping. And then this group became very profitable. And then while this was going on, I had a roofing business and a remodeling. At that time, we were doing more exterior repairs, wood rot. And after measuring the past jobs, I found that, we didn't have a proper bidding template, and, we're spending more on the materials than we had planned on. So that was causing me to lose money. And so most of the jobs we weren't profitable, and looking at it, the few jobs we were profitable, we just kind of pulled numbers out of the air. We were actually too high, and but somehow we still got the job. So then, I started measuring everything, and of course, employees didn't like this. They rebelled to this because now I'm watching, I'm measuring, and if the salesman said it took this many hours or days to do the job, I was questioning when it went over, and they didn't like that I had my eyes on it. But it worked. I became very profitable. And, if I'd never measured these, the business would have crumbled years ago. Or say, miraculously, if the business didn't crumble, I'd probably still be struggling along, trying to make payroll watching my paychecks getting smaller and smaller. So, be sure to measure everything so you're getting the results that you want. I thought, a while about that diesel truck. My friends were probably right. It would have saved a lot in gas, and it would have been a lot nicer to drive. That particular truck had the death wobble to it if you hit a bump. But, measuring the full cost saved me from a decision that looked good on the surface, but would have cost me thousands. That's a small decision compared to, what was happening in my business at this time, when I had the 16 employees showing up every day, trucks rolling out, jobs lined up for months. I was drowning, not because we weren't working hard, not because we didn't have the customers, but because I wasn't measuring. I wasn't measuring the things that mattered. And when I did start to measure, the truth, it was brutal. 5 of the 8 lawn care accounts, they were bleeding me. Construction jobs without the proper bidding template, a lot of the jobs were bleeding me. I was guessing, hoping, praying it would work out, but it wasn't. So Peter Drucker was right. He was right. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So here's what you need to check in your business. So check your fluids. First, measure your profitability by customer, by route, by service. Don't just look at the total revenue. That's what a lot of people do. I'm making this much money. This much money is coming in, but are you really making money? Are you profitable? Look at what's actually making you money and what's costing you money. I thought I was busy and successful. I was busy and broke. There's a difference. Second, measure the full cost of your decisions. It's just not the sticker price. It's insurance, taxes, equipment, opportunity cost. My diesel truck decision looked smart until I measured everything. Your business decisions are the same way. Third, measure consistently, not just once. I check fluids every few fill-ups. You need to check your business fluids maybe every month, every quarter. What was profitable 6 months ago might not be profitable today because markets change, costs change. So measure and measure again. So if you're struggling to make payroll, if you're busy but don't have cash, if you're feeling like you're working harder than ever but getting nowhere, stop and measure. Measure your routes, your jobs, measure your employees. Measure the time they're spending on stuff. Measure your profit margins. Measure everything. You can't improve what you don't measure. And you can't fix what you won't face. This is chapter 23 from my book, Business is a Journey, Not a Destination, and this journey is your life. If this resonated with you, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm releasing all chapters of this book right here. So check your fluids, measure what matters. Your business journey depends upon it. Next chapter, we're going to be talking about roadblocks and coming up with a strategy to get around it, because you're going to have those in your business journey. So press on. Your journey matters. Thanks for watching.